Week 1 Viva. How did the factions within first century Judaism originate? In the Bible, we see Jewish groups such as the Pharisees as one-dimensional, or the bad guys of the Bible. However, when we look at historical context, we see that the various factions in Judaism during the time of Christ emerged from the history of foreign domination and the resulting class divisions in Jewish culture. The three Jewish groups we will look at are the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. My first point is that the Pharisees emerged from the class of Jews who were left behind during the Babylonian captivity. The temple was destroyed, so they developed new rules and teachings for purity. In 597 BC, Babylonians invaded Jerusalem, but they only took the smart, handsome, and upper-class Jews, like Daniel. These men were educated in Babylon by their culture and ideas, so as can be expected, they became very different from the Jews that were still stuck at home in Israel. Some of these Jews in Babylon were even given much power, like how Nebuchadnezzar made Daniel ruler over the province of Babylon. However, back in Israel, their homeland was changing. Harold Ellen says, quote, "The Pharisees surfaced during the Babylonian captivity as a means of keeping the Jewish culture alive," unquote. The Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and its temple. This made temple worship and sacrifice impossible, and created changes in Judaism that would never be reversed. So how were the Jews supposed to keep themselves pure now? As a whole, Judaism began to center around the sacred writings. The Torah took the place of the temple. Studying the Torah became the focus, with weekly meetings in houses, and later in synagogues. Priests were taken into captivity, so the teaching was done by learned men called rabbis. This class of people who led the change in Judaism would eventually become the Pharisees. They created new laws that were passed on orally and they focused on Sabbath observance, purity laws, and dietary restrictions. Josephus wrote that the Pharisees gained prominence under Maccabean rule. They were thought to have been established as a distinct party during the 2nd century BC, when pious Jews fought against the influence of Greek education. So they created a national system of education, where all Jewish boys could be taught the Torah. This movement also increased the spread of synagogues nationally. My second point is that the Sadducees emerged as a religious faction from the upper-class society that descended from the Jews who were in exile in Babylon. Upon returning, these people assumed that they could just regain their historic roles in society, although most of them really hadn't ever lived in Israel. However, many Jews did not trust these returning exiles, thinking them agents of the Persian king, which in some cases was true. Many thought that these new Jews were more cosmopolitan and connected with other cultures than actually Jewish. This opinion was influenced by the upper class's behavior when they decided to open the gates of Jerusalem for Alexander the Great. According to Josephus, quote, "When Alexander the Great came to conquer Jerusalem, Jedua and the priests got dressed in their finery and went out to meet Alexander," unquote. These upper-class royalty gave Alexander a warm welcome. They were clothed in their white linen and purple robes, and they opened up the gates. Apparently, Alexander was so stunned that he got off his horse and bowed before Jedua. The Sadducees did not believe in resurrection of the dead, so they were very actively working against the early church, and they were responsible for the death of James, the brother of Jesus. According to Josephus, whereas many of the early Christians were in fact Pharisees, including Paul, because the Pharisees did believe in the resurrection of the dead. My third point is that the Essenes were a unique Jewish sect that lived a strict life of solitude. They believed that the Messiah would return soon to bring punishment on the wicked. The Essenes gave up the temple system and withdrew into a life of monastic devotion and to studying Jewish scriptures. They followed a strict code of conduct, and some sects pledged celibacy, which was one reason why the group remained so small. No mention is there of the Essenes in the New Testament, but John the Baptist and his followers could have been influenced by them and could have had similar beliefs and practices. What do we know about the way that the Essenes lived? They dispersed their wealth, so no one could be seen superior or inferior based on his wealth. They were very focused on being pure, so that they only wore whites and kept very clean. According to Josephus, quote, "They consider olive oil a stain, and should anyone be accidentally smeared with it, scrubs his body," unquote. They would get up before the sunrise, have no small talk, and only say ancestral prayers. Then they would go to work. At the 5th hour of the day, they would bathe in frigid water to purify themselves, and then eat a small meal in a private hall with strict meal rules to follow. However, we also have many ancient biblical texts thanks to the Essenes. In conclusion, although we often look at Jewish factions as being one-dimensional and without historical context, the various factions during the time of Christ emerged from the history of foreign denomination and the resulting class divisions in Jewish culture. These three groups were the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes.